Next on Brute Force, the history of weapons at war. They're the only smart weapons that can think for themselves. They're elite warriors trained for guerrilla warfare. From the moment they enter basic training, they are molded into the most formidable foes. From the secret OSS in World War II to the special forces inside Vietnam, their methods are unconventional, their spirit is unmatched. They're thinking weapons. Next on Brute Force, the history of weapons at war.
From all over the country, they arrive each week. Bright-eyed, idealistic young men looking for something different. At a time when many of their friends are still deciding what to do, these men have already chosen. Each has volunteered to be a fighting man. Each has asked to become a Marine. For this, they've traded in the next 4 years of their lives. Yet few of them know what lies ahead. The Marines don't promise high seas adventure or glamorous job skills. They promise discipline.
You're now aboard the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, California, receiving orders at Building 622. From now on, the last word out of your mouth is sir. You understand? Yes, sir! I said the last word out of your mouth is sir. So you're going to say either yes, sir, or no, sir. You understand? Yes, sir! Get off the bus. 1, 2, 3, 4, next 4, let's go, hurry up! 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You're about to get your first Marine Corps haircut.
It takes about 20 seconds for the recruits to realize their transition from civilian life to boot camp begins on this first night. Within minutes, the message is clear. There are 2 ways to do anything: the wrong way and the Marine way. Before they know it, it's daybreak. There's no time to sleep, and there's no turning back now.
Well, why are we not done yet? Why? Hurry it up! It's not time today. How about while we're still young? You better wake up and you better start thinking. Concentrate up now. I'm waiting. I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
The first week is the most difficult for recruits. They're adapting not only to the military way of life, but also to their drill instructor, who will challenge them like no one else.
You don't want to do what you're told, huh? You don't want to do what you're told. You want to move at your own pace, huh? There we go. Push, push, push. Run, 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 run.
Every day you have eyeballs. The recruits are always looking at the drill instructors. They're looking at you from head to toe, from sun up to sundown, every day. The recruit's going to emulate their drill instructors. The drill instructors, the standards high, then of course the recruit standards high. It's very important to set the standard for the recruit.
You're undisciplined, unmotivated. You do not want to try. I'm tired of you. I'm tired of teaching you, and you don't learn. Push, push, push.
Discipline, obedience, loyalty to the Corps, these are the virtues the drill instructors demand. Serving 3 to a platoon, they will shadow their men for the next 88 days. Of all the armed forces, it is the Marines who pride themselves on their toughness, strong bodies, and strong minds.
It's almost impossible to describe what you learn in 1 week here. You learn a lot about yourself. every second, every minute, you know, every hour, they have something planned for you here. I mean, you know, whether it's they're going to do this at this time, and, you know, we'll give them so many minutes to take a shower, and so many minutes to go to the restroom, and so many minutes to be marching. You know, I mean, everything's planned.
Then there is the marching. At all times, the platoon is at attention, whether running, marching, or at parade rest. They're listening to orders and responding as one. Nothing is left to chance. No wrong move goes unnoticed. Under the watchful eye of their drill instructor, they relearn how to walk, how to talk. Within the group, these recruits become part of something bigger than themselves. The pressure to conform is overwhelming, and emotions run high. Peer pressure and fear of failure play a part in breaking down each man's sense of individuality, reinforcing the notion of teamwork. When one man makes a mistake, the entire group is punished with physical training.
It kind of makes the rest of the platoon watch that person and keep him in line so it doesn't happen again. If one person messes up in the field, that's like, he might kill the rest of the platoon. So you have to keep everybody in line.
It's not to embarrass that one particular recruit or to put him on the spot, but it's just to let him know, basically, like, we're all one team. So if one recruit messes up, then we all pay for it. Now, in the same token, when a recruit does good, you use them as an example. And this is what we need to do. If one recruit can comprehend it and get the job done correctly, then everybody else should be able to.
Through shared adversity, the constant drilling fosters group cohesion and instantaneous obedience.
I don't know, but I've been told.
I don't know, but I've been told.
Marine Corps wings are made of gold.
Sooner or later, each man will question his decision to join.
You find yourself saying constantly, why am I here? What is the purpose? Why did I make this decision to join the Marine Corps? I could be out partying with my friends. I can be out doing this, that, and the other. But at some point in your life, you have to grow up. You have to become an adult.
The first phase of boot camp emphasizes physical training, or PT. Then up to 6 hours of academics a day, followed by more PT. Every minute they aren't in training is used to absorb hundreds of other details they are expected to know. On the confidence course, the drill instructors teach by example. Then, little by little, one by one, each recruit confronts his fears head on.
Everything that the drill instructors do is done for a purpose. And little by little, they explain these things, and it starts dawning on you. And that purpose is to get us, if ever we have to go to combat, get us out of combat alive.
In wartime, soldiers often become confused and dazed to a point where the ability to make sharp decisions is lost. The Marines want men who can react instinctively in the fog of war.
Incoming!
In the second phase of boot camp, recruits are exposed to different weapons, some of them for the first time. This is the reason most of them joined, to become part of one of the most elite fighting forces in the world. It also means a new approach to training.
There's a time for stress and recruit out, and there's a time for teaching. And up there, we're dealing with live rounds, we're dealing with weapons. So we want to teach them safety first, and then after safety is when we start teaching the basic fundamentals of marksmanship, because we have a saying that the deadliest weapon in the world is a Marine with a rifle.
To enter the Corps, each recruit must qualify as a rifleman. No exceptions. By the last phase, most of the recruits establish a close bond with their platoon and their drill instructors. Through adversity and competition with other platoons, they've grown together as a close-knit group.
My platoon is my family. I think if them as all my brothers, I would stick by them through thick and thin.
The morale fostered here is intended to stay with them no matter what the conditions. Most feel there is nothing they can't do. If war came tomorrow, these men would be the first to volunteer.
The armies that win are the armies that have the better quality soldiers. The quality of your soldier is so important to the execution of your tactics that they are totally intertwined. Therefore, high-quality soldiers are the goal of almost every army, the molding and creation of high-quality soldiers. And this is not yet a science, it's an art. No one knows really what goes into educating someone to make him into the kind of soldier that is necessary to fight in a situation where he is totally surrounded by confusion and death and the fog of war.
There is a strange thing about war. Even with its bloodshed and cruelty, its pain and grief, soldiers have to be inspired to fight. From the Roman legions to the French Revolutionary Army, military commanders have sought to instill morale and camaraderie while still forcing their men to go to war. Of his soldiers' strength, Napoleon once said, "The moral to the physical is 3 to 1. British Field Marshal Montgomery claimed, "The morale of the foot soldier is the greatest single factor in winning a war." World War I was the first global war where entire nations had become aroused, each entering the conflict on a crest of patriotic fervor. The United States mobilized its army through forced conscription. Of all the men drafted into Army basic training, just 21% had a high school diploma.
Basically, it was a real citizens' army, and it was composed mostly of young men in their teens, up to 25 or so, that were in business, school, on the farms. We were simple, clean kids.
For the first time, Army psychiatrists developed what came to be known as alpha aptitude tests and classified soldiers by the skills they could best perform. Still, most ended up as infantrymen and trained to fight with their rifle and bayonet.
We had some few rifles. We learned the manual of arms, and we had some Colt automatics. So we learned how to shoot, but we all, farm kids, we all knew how to shoot. I was a good marksman.
The draftees had just 3 weeks to prepare before they were shipped off to the Western Front.
The officers faced the terrific job that they had ahead of them to train us and bring us up to a stature that would withstand modern warfare. I was in France 30 days after I enlisted here.
In Europe, the Americans trained with their allies briefly before assembling at train stations with a one-way ticket to the front. On the front lines, the men finally came face to face with the enemy and their own worst fears.
To talk about and think about killing a man, you don't. You just do your job and take care of the enemy to keep him from getting you or your buddies. You've got to go after him and do it first. You've got to be aggressive, mean. You adopt an attitude to live for today. And I had some vicious hand-to-hand combat. But this time, I was a man. I wasn't a kid anymore. You grow up overnight when you're under fire, the constant noise, the misery, the uncomfortableness. You're either always sleepy, hungry, or tired. In the Army, you never get to feel good. At least you don't in combat.
The devastation of the machine gun and mustard gas further weakened the foot soldiers' morale. In the end, few soldiers held to their romantic view of war.
We would go into the tents where they had first aid and watch the doctor saw a leg off or an arm off. Then we realized that there's nothing romantic about warfare. It's a deadly, stinking occupation.
Thinking Weapons will return in a moment here on A&E.
After Pearl Harbor and the declaration of war by Germany and Italy, the United States military was forced to mobilize. By the end of the war, more than 8 million men would be serving in the Army. Training them was no easy task. In 1942, the U.S. fighting man needed a good knowledge of mines and booby traps, map reading, camouflage techniques, and survival skills in the wilderness. He had to operate bazookas, grenades, flamethrowers, mortars, and machine guns. In the Pacific, he would use these weapons against one of the toughest fighting forces ever. In Japan, all able-bodied adult men were liable for compulsory service and were conditioned for military life at an early age. Most of the conscripts were peasants. Averaging 5'3" and weighing 120 pounds, they were tough, healthy, and used to hard work. But they possessed more than just physical strength. Of the 20,000 Japanese soldiers that contested the tiny island of Iwo Jima, only 216 were taken prisoner. The rest were killed or committed suicide. Their willingness to fight to the last man was part of the ancient rites of Bushido, the code of the samurai. Failure in battle meant only one thing: the soldier lacked a fighting spirit.
You took the rules and regulations that had governed these the samurai, and you applied those rules to the army organization, and you inculcated people who were not of the warrior class into feeling that they were warriors.
The Japanese soldier was also instilled with an absolute belief in the emperor and the destiny of Japan. An imperial decree in 1882 made the command of a superior officer the moral equivalent to a command from the emperor himself.
The Japanese had very, very sadistic discipline patterns. So for an ordinary Japanese soldier, there was nothing to being beaten around by his immediate superiors. And then he's ignorant. He doesn't know anything at all about the outside world. And so therefore he's a perfect foil for the propaganda. So he really is afraid, you know, that if he is captured, the enemy will do all kinds of terrible things to him. Plus the fact that he's disgraced himself, his family, and his emperor.
After an exhausting 3-month indoctrination course, the soldiers were convinced their mission was one of liberation, to rid their neighbors of imperialist Westerners. As the soldiers shoved off for fighting units in the South Pacific, Asia for the Asians became their battle cry. Against the Allies in the Pacific, they put little emphasis on armor or artillery support, preferring to rely on their fighting spirit, large numbers, and swarming tactics.
When you get excited, it's like adrenaline in your blood, and that's the reason I think the American soldiers really was good. They wasn't forced to it. It just something, it came into them. The Japanese, well, I think, had the same adrenaline, but they would do things that just get themselves killed, where the American was really had the adrenaline in them. They would protect themselves. They knew when to duck their damn head down and keep their ass down, you know. Where the Japanese, they just come right at you, hollering and screaming and blowing that darn bugle, and they just didn't give up. You had to kill them. That's all there was to it. You do get pretty excited, but that excitement I kind of liked. I always did. Now, some guys just naturally can't take that pressure, but I learned to take care of myself and help take care of the other buddy. But for God's sake, use your head. Just don't get up there and stand up there and get shot. You don't have to stand up there and get shot for nobody.
If death in battle was the highest dignity for a Japanese soldier, then capture by the enemy was the lowest depth to which he could sink.
We found out that their commanders had told them if they surrendered, we would kill them. It was right on the spot. And Japanese really believed their leaders. They believed their leaders a whole lot more than we believed our leaders. I'll tell you that for a fact. If you got too close to them, we found out, and they had their hands raised up. They either had a hand grenade between their legs with a pin out, and you got up there to take them in and search them. They released that, and you'd kill you and anybody else around you.
The Americans were even more puzzled by Japanese soldiers' behavior after they were taken prisoner. Some immediately volunteered to fight for the Allies, offering to divulge any information they could to defeat their homeland. This instant change in loyalty confounded many, but Army psychologists concluded their strict Army code was to blame. By insisting that captured soldiers were no longer members of Japanese society, the code gave no instruction on how to behave if captured. Once outcast, the soldiers eagerly looked to secure a place in their new society. In Burma, Japanese prisoners worked with their captors to compose propaganda leaflets that promised hope rather than gloom and doom. They appealed to the personal interests of the soldier, asking him to surrender and promising fair treatment. With the help of artillery shells, the leaflets were literally targeted toward their audience. The leaflet campaigns produced some converts, but mass surrenders never came, and the Japanese continued to fight on to the last man.
Thinking Weapons will return in a moment here on A&E.
In June of 1940, the British were still smarting from their narrow escape off the European mainland at Dunkirk. As his army regrouped to fight another day, Winston Churchill demanded a new unit of elite soldiers trained for espionage and sabotage.
What you see in armies that have been primarily draft armies are that certain units are selected and volunteers are achieved through different means to form special units to do what the whole army cannot do.
A call went out for volunteers to meet the most stringent physical and mental standards ever set by the British Army. 25% failed the fitness test alone. Those who were eventually chosen earned the title of Army Commando. Their trademark was self-reliance. The commando went into action only with the weapons and ammunition he could carry on his back. He learned to live off the land. If he was cut off from his superiors, he was expected to think for himself and carry out the mission alone. The Army Commandos specialized in amphibious warfare, attacking German positions along the Atlantic coast at will. Their weapon of choice was dynamite, and they used it everywhere, destroying vital enemy installations, communication centers, and other key positions. This elite force demonstrated guerrilla warfare was perhaps the most effective way to demoralize an enemy, striking him when he least expects it from behind his line. Their success did not go unnoticed. In 1941, President Roosevelt ordered a search for the Army's best and brightest people to make up the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. One of the screening prerequisites was for those who spoke a foreign language. Army Captain Aaron Banks spoke French and German. After his selection, he was sent to special schools in England.
They tested us psychologically, and they tested us for initiative and whether or not we were innovative, and physically. We went from school to school. One school taught demolitions, one taught foreign weapons. There was even one that taught you how to differentiate between different types of ammunition by just feeling them. You could do it in the dark. We had guerrilla tactics in another one of the schools. Communications, we all had to be able to use Morse code on a radio up to 12 words a minute. Map reading, patrolling, gathering of intelligence, how to spread propaganda.
Each OSS agent became a seasoned parachutist, a necessary skill for insertion into enemy territory. They also tested methods for quick aerial retrieval. As part of Operation Jedburgh, the OSS grouped its agents into separate three-man teams and gave them contacts of German resistance movements in Europe. Each was given civilian clothing and a new identity. In 1943, Aaron Bank was assigned to southern France.
We were flown from the air base outside of Algiers over the Mediterranean above the Massif Central, about 70 miles northwest of Marseille. And we jumped at an altitude of about 5,000 feet. We were met by a reception committee, and they took us to our command post that they had set up for us near the city of Alès.
Once in place, Bank began training the leaders of several French underground units in the art of unconventional warfare. His only link to the OSS headquarters was his portable transmitter.
We had what was called the suitcase radio. It had a range of 1,000 miles. It was a Morse code radio. You had to tap on the keys, and it fit into a suitcase that was a shabby-looking thing, and my radio operator would change his location every couple of days because the enemy did have radio location vehicles floating around. My radio operator was in contact twice a day with Algiers, and I requested arms, ammunition, rations, and we had a number of airdrops so that we were able to arm these people, and with the training that they got, they were in pretty good shape and getting ready to conduct guerrilla warfare.
The men were under orders to wait for the Allied invasion of southern France.
And when we got the signal by radio that the invasion was imminent, we then unleashed them, and we operated between the southern forces of the Germans and their northern forces. And as soon as the invasion started, we knew it because we could hear the big guns of the Navy ships, and we waited. And before too long, the retreat started up the Rhone Valley. And that's when we went to work on them. We had blown the railroad, so they had to take their tanks overland instead of on freight cars. And that caused them to expend a lot more oil and gas, took a lot more time.
With all the tools at their disposal, the resistance teams ambushed German convoys and foot patrols.
We kept them bunched up, we blocked them, and it gave the Air Force a chance to strafe the devil out of them, as well as the casualties we created ourselves. When that ended, we figured that we had around 2,500 to 2,800 guerrillas in our whole force. Now that's an accomplishment that just 3 men, 3 Allied soldiers, were able to accomplish.
General Eisenhower later estimated the resistance guerrilla movement in Europe alone to be the Army equivalent of 15 infantry divisions.
The whole country wanted to be free of the German occupation. And there's one big thing about guerrilla warfare. If guerrillas have the support of the people, and they have the support of an outside power, they are practically unbeatable. They're almost sure to win.
Thinking Weapons will return in a moment here on A&E.
In Burma, an OSS detachment of 25 men organized an irregular force of 11,000 Kachin natives to fight the Japanese occupation army. They killed over 5,000 Japanese with a loss of just 15 Americans and 74 Kachin warriors. It was one of the greatest kill-loss ratios in military history. Despite their record of success, the OSS was disbanded by President Truman in 1945. But their combined tactics of covert action, espionage, and sabotage redefined warfare and demonstrated the potential of a few highly motivated men. In Europe, the British and American forces pooled their efforts to undermine enemy morale. Their target was the German soldier's mind. For the first time, radio allowed friend and foe alike to talk to one another across battle lines. German-speaking psychological officers would break in on Radio Stuttgart with bogus Allied attack warnings and confusing orders for military units. Without jamming their own stations, there were few ways for the Germans to resist this tactic.
The means at hand for psychological warfare on the line were much greater in World War II. You'd set up little newspapers to send over, send leaflets on the spot. There were many on-site things, large-scale broadcasters to broadcast the nature of defeats that had been suffered. One of the great advantages the Allied had was when the war began to run in their favor, they could very scrupulously tell the truth about events, and they tried not to exaggerate.
Before their surrender in Italy, the crumbling German front was further weakened by psychological warfare.
The interrogation of prisoners, of course, is a vital part of psychological warfare because you derive intelligence not only about the prisoners, but about the existing forces that have not yet been captured.
In a cycle that fed itself, prisoners that surrendered with leaflets were screened for new information that Army psychologists could exploit.
We began to write leaflets, not of the sort you could drop over Berlin and Rome, so that any German or any Italian could read them. We wrote leaflets that came to have meaning only for the German army, only for the Italian army. We became interested in which officers the men disliked, what was wrong with their food, why their casualties were unduly high when certain of their officers wanted decorations and the like. All the things that we thought could embitter them and destroy their confidence in their leaders.
Thousands of copies rolled off the high-speed presses each day. Fighter and bomber crews routinely carried the demoralizing leaflets in special containers to drop in conjunction with their bomb load. The leaflets were also rolled into packages and inserted in smoke shells. When fired by artillery guns, the leaflets would scatter at 300 feet above their target.
I remember firing when the beaches of Salerno were very hot indeed, and a British major was very upset every time he fired leaflets for us instead of high explosive. He made no effort to hide the fact that he thought this was sheer nonsense. The next day when I came back to fire some more, I'd found a convert. I've rarely seen anyone more enthusiastic. The reason was very simple. About an hour after I left the battery position, a German prisoner with one of our leaflets in his hand came forward to surrender. This German said that the argument of the leaflet persuaded him to come over. He told the British major of artillery the precise positions of 4 German mortars. For 3 days we tried to get those mortars. They killed 100-odd British boys. We silenced them in a matter of minutes.
In the Korean War, C-47s were equipped with enormous loudspeakers to broadcast prisoner confessions and demands for surrender. They were also designed to distribute thousands of leaflets. By war's end, the psychological warfare campaign had persuaded some North Korean army units to lay down their arms and surrender. With the OSS disbanded, few organized guerrilla tactics were employed by the UN forces in Korea. Several OSS veterans urged the Army to create another elite fighting force.
When it was sold to the Army, I was in charge of a small staff in the Pentagon in 1951 that had the mission of convincing the Army to form and establish an unconventional warfare unit. The mission that the Army was sold on was the conduct of guerrilla warfare and all its aspects. And that was the mission of Special Forces right through the 50s.
Unconventional warfare, by its nature, demands rugged individuals to fight the guerrilla war. They have to be prepared to be inserted anywhere in the world by any means of transportation and accomplish their mission in the harshest of environments. Every Special Forces prospect was screened for aptitude and had to be a triple volunteer, requesting service in the Army and airborne before asking for Special Forces. Only 40% made it through the training. In 1961, President Kennedy embraced the efforts of the Special Forces and stressed the need for more unconventional units. The Navy lost no time in developing its SEAL teams, named for their ability to operate on sea, air, or land. The SEALs trained to infiltrate enemy territory from high altitudes and perfected techniques for underwater sabotage. For long-distance operations, they converted old Regulus missile submarines into covert delivery vehicles. Before long, the Special Forces and SEALs would be in Southeast Asia, pitted against one of the toughest guerrilla forces ever, the Viet Cong.
Thinking Weapons will return in a moment here on A&E.
By the early 60s, the Army Special Forces were based in Vietnam, serving as advisors to the South Vietnamese Army. As the conflict grew, so did their numbers.
Special Forces were the best trained, best equipped soldiers in the world. And in Vietnam, we were the best there. All the people on our team were specialists. Each member of our team had a specialty. We had operations intelligence, we had heavy and light weapons, we had demolitions, communications. The guys on my team all spoke 2, 3, some of them 5 foreign languages.
You cross-trained each other in your particular specialties, and you liked working together as a team. And that's what separated us really from other units. No matter how old or new you were on the team, you always felt an integral part of it, and you trusted the guys that you worked with, and they trusted you.
The Special Forces recruited local tribesmen, the Montagnards, to fight the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Regular Army. The native Montagnards had battled the Vietnamese for centuries. They knew the terrain and made excellent scouts. The Special Forces paid them top dollar, so there was never a shortage of volunteers. Combined with the Special Forces, they made up the Mobile Strike Force.
Each corps area had their own mic force and usually provided security for that corps area, but anytime there was an intense flare-up, they would send for the 5th Mobile Strike Force. We had 7 companies of trained Montagnards and Chinese, and we were the best equipped, so they usually sent for us.
Special Forces made use of fast, low-flying helicopters for quick aerial insertions.
If their camp was under attack, then we went in, reinforced the camp, repelled the invaders. If there were lots of activity in the area, we'd go in and do real aggressive patrolling in the area.
In the jungle, the Special Forces met a most skilled adversary, the Viet Cong. Inspired by the teachings of Mao Zedong and funded by the Chinese and North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong's strategy was to prolong the war against the stronger Americans. Sooner or later, they reasoned, the United States would lose the political means to continue the fight.
They were there for the long haul, and we weren't. And I think that's where the mindset was different.
In their rubber sandals and black pajamas, the Viet Cong didn't appear formidable, but their strength was in their resourcefulness and conviction. They knew a wounded American soldier drained more than manpower. He drained morale. Every resource was used to create demoralizing weapons that tended to wound a few rather than kill in large numbers. Unexploded American cluster bomblets were converted into landmines. Anything that could support their war effort was saved and reused.
They were so disciplined that they picked up every piece of brass on the battlefield. They didn't leave anything on the battlefield. Most of them had handmade weapons, handmade guns, rifles, pistols. They made their own booby traps. They had handmade claymore mines that they made, handmade booby traps. Of course, they employed punji stakes. They employed punji pits, all kinds of traps.
The Viet Cong were also masters of sabotage. Through their vast network of tunnels, they could strike quickly and disappear underground to fight another day.
They had tunnels that ran for miles. They actually built tunnels from Cambodia into Vietnam. Some of them went 17, 18 miles. That's a long tunnel. They had everything underground. And they had truck parks, they had hospitals and banks. They had their teletype machines set up underneath there, their barracks, their ammunition storage. Everything was underground. They didn't camp out.
There was no place safe in Vietnam. Essentially, even in the rear areas, the potential for rocket or mortar fire or sniper or bomb or any of those activities could take place.
The Navy SEALs missions took them deep into enemy territory, looking for patterns of enemy troop movements. They often went in not to kill, but to capture. One prisoner could provide the information needed to capture many more. Reminiscent of earlier conflicts, POW confessions were worked into psychological operations. To maximize their chances of being picked up, leaflets were printed to look like money. On the Ho Chi Minh Trail, they often contained poetry with themes of men's loneliness, hardship, and imminent death. Loudspeakers were also used against the Viet Cong to exploit their superstitions. They were terrified of being buried in an unmarked grave.
One of the telltale signs of a impending battle was to discover coffins being made in the villages, because they always tried to bury their dead.
PSYOPs teams recorded ghost sounds and played them in the middle of the night, hoping to weaken their will to fight.
Many times in Vietnam, airplanes have been fitted with loudspeakers, and information is put out as to how to give yourself up or why you should cease fighting and so forth. Against a strongly indoctrinated enemy like the North Vietnamese, this is probably not too productive. You'll catch the occasional person who is already disgruntled, who's already tired of the war and ready to defect. But as far as affecting sentiment, it was just not the time or the place for it to have effect.
We didn't have a Chinaman's chance from the beginning. We never should have been in there. They were fighting for independence like we did in 1776.
Still, the Special Forces kill-loss record was without equal in the war. But along with their many accolades came animosity.
We NCOs, we took pride in being unconventional soldiers. We were there to win. We weren't there to punch our tickets or get promotions. We were there to do our job and get out in the shortest amount of time. But the conventional thinking of the Army at that time was they didn't want any special elite forces there because they thought we were just too cocky for our own good. And they didn't like the way we wore our jump boots or we wore our tiger fatigues. But we won. We won our battles. And our men respected us. And we respected ourselves.
Elsewhere, morale had reached an all-time low. Cohesion within the armed forces was lackluster at best. In the 60s, 1 out of every 6 soldiers retired or separated from the service each year. 43% of them had less than 1 year's experience. Farewell parties for draftees had become an everyday occurrence. These problems were finally addressed with the institution of the All-Volunteer Force in 1975. Only those who wanted to serve stayed on.
Now, today on the modern battlefield, we demand an internal discipline, a self-discipline. So the soldier has to be self-generating. He has to be able to keep himself in the battle, knowing why he's there and what he's supposed to do. You need to have a positive training where you can take what the individual strengths already are, pick qualities, and on strength. So you can especially what you call take tests and use those. You can use the positive aspect of that to make them into superior soldiers.
Where are you from?
The downside of U.S. forces, new personnel is extremely competitive. The chosen are more qualified than ever, and each recruit makes through boot camp does so of his own will.
Tomorrow, their control is frightening, and their tactics are deadly. Bill Curtis explores the Mafia's hold on Italy on an all-new investigative reports. Now stay tuned for A&E's and Evening at the Improv next.